So earlier I was describing like someone who keeps dropping stuff, mainly dropping the ball. And I'm sad to say that I was actually just describing myself because I'm always caught with my hands full. One thing that you can do to lighten the load is understanding how good a bag is, because it is essentially just a blanket that has been turned over and fastened around the mouth. And if you've ever been turned over and fastened around the mouth, you might have a great representation of the amount of pressure a volcano feels during its eruption. One way of lightening the load is virtual reality. If I could just like make the magazine I was carrying around, cutting out like all the middle and just keeping the cover in the back end, it would be lightening the load, so that as long as like there's the two end points having like the over accentuations and information is conserved, you're going to be able to do that with just about anything. So I've been frightened as a spitter that I would spit on something that was near a graveyard, and then it would run off into the runoff into the yard of the grave. And that's not the same as directly but spitting on it, but in a localized perception, it's almost worse, because then it would be run off into multiple ones. I'm fascinated with paranormal activity, so I'm always watching to see the camera if there's anything weird. I just heard a thump behind me, like on the last clip, and then I looked behind me and there was absolutely nothing there. When you talk about farming, you have to mention the consumer eating it. So if you have like a robot making your food, it's always going to be like the same batch, but when someone makes the ingredients, and then you can get good batches, and this is what a judge would be taking into consideration when he's weighing his measurements. Just reading the feed through the input. That's a virtual reality. So I'm asking the librarians, do you know anyone who has done virtual reality? It's a trick question, because they're looking at me through a plexiglass window and they're using light to peer through it. Ostensibly, that's all you need to construct a emulator. The purpose of living isn't to find out how many people you can kill. That's not funny at all, but for some reason in virology, they seem to think that in order to save people, they need to find out how to take out as many people possible by making the most dangerous scenario. And if it so happens to accidentally fall into the wrong hands, well, luckily they're funded by the government. And that there's a reality, and then there's a virtual reality. And so when I was asking the librarian, have you ever seen anyone doing the virtual reality, she said not in person. That's the best answer that you can give to that question, because the definition of the virtual reality is it not being personable. It's the persona that would be the existence in that exercise. And so when we're looking at like a flag and it has like a stars and stripes, this is uncannily resembling like a particle and wave. You can't take a star and a stripe like in a literal aspect. An artistic representation would be 5 points, and the stripes would only be as the length of an entire flag. That's an artistic representation of it. But if you want to get like to a literal standpoint, well, then you would have to look up into the sky at the amount of a star. And a star is twinkling because it's not ever set in an exact definite time frame. So you can't measure like 5 points on a star because it's always twinkling. The second attribute of a flag, which is stripes. So if a particle is a star, the waves of the stripes, which is rather putting because a flag waves, and so the stripes on it would be waving as well. You're taking the twinkling of a star and an aspect. On the flag there's like 50 of them because there's 50 states, or there's 52 in any case. You can pick out in the sky if you want like a more literal representation of an abstract notion, i.e. the artistic representation of the flag. If you want to take it literal, then you have got to pick out like 52 stars in the sky, and then you can actually set a course where you would measure the twinkling of them. And these are the biggest coronal ejections out of the groups of stars that you chose. And those biggest coronal ejections would be the ratio of an amount of time where it took for the 5 biggest ones on each of the stars that you picked. And in that amount of time, you can measure the length between each of the 52 stars that you picked. And that can be represented as the stripe with topology. Make this square of the blue backdrop behind the star, the 52 star group. And from that backdrop, you can then measure out the stripe's size. And you have a literal representation of an abstract piece of art based off a definite measurement, because it's over an amount of time. And if you don't know the coronal ejection, there are these giant jets like a volcano shooting out. The coronal ejection of a star is on its surface shooting out. So it's like lava, where we were talking about before. A star is made up of lava essentially, and it's so hot that it doesn't need the I take that back, it's so hot it's not lava, it's plasma. And so the plasma of the star is so hot that it doesn't need these walls of a volcano to randomly shoot outward. And when it does have these coronal ejections, is done so through a thing called weird surface tension, where the buildup of the plasma, because plasma is like a material, but it's so hot that it doubles as a liquid. And so when it's deciding which one it is, it actually builds up like these dark spots, and then from the dark spots they're a comparison to the fluidity of the hot spots. And so instead of a rock volcano mouth, it coronally ejects off these weird surface tensions, which is the gathering of cornering those dark spots with the hottest plasma spews. And when that occurs, it shoots out that back end, it capsizes inward, and then you have an injection of a coronal mass at that specific region. And over a set amount of time, you can count out the 5 biggest ones for a depiction of a star, one of which there are 52 that you get to choose on the flag. They're your favorite stars. Go into the lost and found, you have to sort through what is yours. Imagine if someone went there and pretended to not know it was a lost and found, and they thought it was a free giveaway. This is kind of how attorneys act when attorneys are put on the stand, and they're there to show which jurors they like, because the attorneys select jurors. The jurors can be, excuse me, let me reiterate that, but first let's look at this. Now, I've seen a lot of things on the ground, and this looks the most dangerous. So the attorney doesn't select jurors. Let me redact that statement. The attorney can deselect jurors. Jurors will be selected at random. The aim is for neutral. And that's why Lost and Founds, I mean, those are the best things that have ever happened to the actual location where things are absorbed. I mean, not physically, but they're literally placed in that same concept where if a Lost and Found was a sponge, well, everyone knows that that's where the items go when they just don't know. And that's why it's so effective, is that it just keeps happening. And so many things are lost because everyone can't find everything all the time.